Assalamu alaikum friends, hope so you all will be fine. Friends, now I'm going to start the series of lectures on carbohydrates metabolism. I have already uploaded lectures about chemistry of carbohydrates, lipid chemistry and lipid metabolism. You can check the playlist on my channel. Okay students. Friends, so let's start our lecture, the digestion and absorption of carbohydrates. Friends, digestion. What does it mean, digestion? Digestion means the breakdown of complex macromolecule into simplest form. And absorption means to come in blood. In this video, I am going to discuss about how the digestion and absorption of carbohydrates takes place through gastrointestinal tract. Basically, in our body there are enzymes that are responsible for the digestion. Okay, now let's start. Friends, in our diet, starch, glycogen, cellulose, maltose, lactose, sucrose, glucose. Friends, these are the components of carbohydrates in our food. This is the food stuff. It is a food stuff. These all starch, glycogen, cellulose, maltose, lactose, sucrose, glucose. These all are components of carbohydrates in our food. Okay, friends. Friends, cellulose, cellulose, it is a dietary fiber. It is a dietary fiber. It is does not digest in gastro through our gastrointestinal tract due to deficiency of cellulase enzyme. Okay, and cellulose, it is very important. It prevents us from constipation. It prevents us from cardiovascular diseases. It prevents us from obesity. It prevents us from diabetes mellitus. It is responsible for the decrease in the absorption of glucose and cholesterol. It is beneficial, so that's why it is called as dietary fiber. Cellulose, hemicellulose, pectin, lignin, gums, these all are the examples of the dietary fibers. They prevents us from constipation, they prevents us from cardiovascular diseases, obesity, diabetes mellitus. Friends, these are the components of a food of carbohydrate in our these are components of carbohydrates in our food. What happens? Basically, the starting site for the digestion of carbohydrate is mouth. So mouth, it is the starting site for the digestion of carbohydrate. Basically, starch, it is made up of amylose and amylopectin. Amylose, it is unbranched chain of glucose. Amylopectin, it is a branch chain of glucose. Amylose is soluble in water, while amylopectin is insoluble in water. So in mouth, when we intake food, what happens? There is release of salivary amylase enzyme from salivary glands. Salivary amylase enzyme. This salivary amylase enzyme, this salivary amylase enzyme, it acts on alpha 1,4 glycosidic linkage of glucose molecule, because starch, it is made up of glucose molecule. It is a homopolysaccharide, glucose and up to so on. And this enzyme, it acts upon here alpha 1,4 glycosidic bond. So salivary amylase enzyme, it acts upon starch. It acts upon starch and converts it into dextrin, maltose, and isomaltose. ओके, ये ओरल कैविटी में इस एंजाइम की हेल्प से डाइजेशन होती है स्टार्च की और डेक्स्ट्रिन माल्टोज आइसोमाल्टोज प्रोडक्ट मिलते हैं। एक बात ध्यान रखिएगा कि तो हमारे माउथ में पार्शियली डाइजेशन होती है स्टार्च की, कंप्लीट डाइजेशन नहीं होती, पार्शियल डाइजेशन। इसलिए कहते हैं कि बहुत ज्यादा चबाया करें, 30 से 32 मरतबा चबाया करें। हम क्या करते हैं कि 10 से 12 दफा चबाने के बाद फौरन निगल निगल जाते हैं। इस तरह से एंजाइम को प्रॉपर टाइम मिलता ही नहीं है कि वो कंप्लीट डाइजेशन कर सके। इसलिए ओरल कैविटी में पार्शियल डाइजेशन होती है और डेक्स्ट्रिन माल्टोज आइसोमाल्टोज प्रोडक्ट मिलते हैं। नेक्स्ट, स्टोमिक। स्टोमिक में किसी भी किस्म के डाइजेशन का प्रोसेस नहीं होता। इनहिबिशन ऑफ एमाइलेज एंजाइम बाय गैस्ट्रिक HCl, हाइड्रोक्लोरिक एसिड की वजह से एंजाइम की जो एक्टिविटी है वो खत्म हो जाती है और HCl, this HCl, it converts sucrose into glucose and fructose. The enzyme is, oh sorry, HCl. This HCl converts sucrose into glucose and fructose. स्टोमिक में किसी भी किस्म की डाइजेशन नहीं होती, सिर्फ सुक्रोज की होती है with the help of HCl, and HCl converts sucrose into glucose and fructose. Now coming toward intestine. Intestine. In intestine, there is when chyme reaches to intestine, then there is a release of pancreatic amylase enzyme. Pancreatic amylase enzyme. This pancreatic amylase enzyme, it also acts upon remaining starch and breaks down alpha 1,4 glycosidic bond of remaining starch and converts them into maltose, isomaltose, lactose, and sucrose. Okay, students, in intestine there is a release of pancreatic amylase enzyme. This enzyme acts upon the remaining starch and breaks down alpha 1,4 glycosidic linkage and converts them into maltose, isomaltose, lactose, and sucrose. Now, in intestine there is a release of disaccharidases enzyme, intestinal disaccharidases enzyme like maltase, isomaltase, lactase, sucrase that act upon these molecules. Now coming toward मैं यहाँ पर लिख रहा हूँ इस तमाम तर को यहाँ पर maltose, isomaltose, lactose, sucrose. These all are acted upon by intestinal disaccharidases enzyme. Like for maltose, there is a maltase enzyme. For isomaltose, there is a isomaltase enzyme. For lactose, there is a lactase enzyme. For sucrose, there is a sucrase enzyme, and convert them into glucose and fructose. And convert them into glucose and fructose. In this way, the digestion of carbohydrate takes place. Students, I am revising again. These are the components of carbohydrates in our food: starch, glycogen, cellulose, maltose, lactose, sucrose, and glucose. Cellulose, it is a dietary fiber. It prevents us from constipation, cardiovascular diseases, obesity, diabetes mellitus. There are other examples of the dietary fibers are like cellulose, pectin, lignin, gums. So the starting step for the digestion of carbohydrate is mouth. In mouth, there is a release of this salivary amylase enzyme that acts upon a 1,4 glycosidic bond of the starch, and starch is made up of amylose and amylopectin, and convert it into dextrin, maltose and isomaltose, and in mouth there is a partially digestion of this starch. Now in stomach, there is inhibition of amylase activity by gastric HCl, and HCl converts only sucrose into glucose and fructose. Now in intestine, there is release of pancreatic amylase enzyme that acts upon alpha 1,4 glycosidic bond of remaining starch and convert them into maltose, isomaltose, lactose and sucrose. And also there is a release of intestinal disaccharidases enzyme, like for maltose there is a maltase enzyme, for isomaltose there is isomaltase enzyme, for lactose there is a lactase enzyme, for sucrose there is a sucrase enzyme, and convert them into glucose and fructose. In this way, the digestion of carbohydrates takes place. Students, यहाँ पर मैं कुछ डिसऑर्डर के बारे में आपको बता रहा हूँ जो कि बहुत ही अहम है. लाइक मैं इसको इरेज कर रहा हूँ. एज जिस तरह से मैंने अभी आपको बताया है कि लैक्टोज पर एक एंजाइम एक्ट करता है और इसे कन्वर्ट कर देता है ग्लूकोज और फ्रक्टोज में, और यहां पर जो एंजाइम एक्ट करता है उसका नाम है लैक्टेज. Students, the deficiency of lactase enzyme, it leads to disorder known as lactose intolerance. Lactose intolerance, and this disease it is common in infants. और कुछ सिम्टम्स ज़ाहिर हो जाते हैं उस इन्फेंट्स में, लाइक एब्डोमिनल पेन. इस तरह का बच्चा वो अपनी माँ का दूध भी नहीं पिएगा. रिफ्यूजल टू ब्रेस्ट मिल्क, एक्सेसिव क्राई, बहुत ज़्यादा रोएगा क्योंकि वो खुद तो नहीं बताया कि मेरे पेट में दर्द है, ठीक है, वो बहुत ज़्यादा रोएगा. एक्सेसिव क्राई, refusal to breast milk, and like abdominal pain, bloating and flatulence. Bloating and flatulence, it is due to production of gases. ओके, तो इस एंजाइम डेफिशिएंसी की वजह से लैक्टोज इंटॉलरेंस डिजीज हो जाती है. और सिम्टम्स क्या है? एब्डोमिनल पेन, एक्सेसिव क्राई, ओके, रिफ्यूजल टू ब्रेस्ट मिल्क, ब्लॉटिंग, फ्लैटुलेंस व्हिच इज ड्यू टू प्रोडक्शन ऑफ गैसेस. और ट्रीटमेंट क्या है? Treatment: avoid the infants, avoid the baby from the breast milk, and give lactose commercial free preparation. Give him lactose, give baby lactose commercial free preparation. Okay, this is disorder lactose intolerance, which is due to deficiency of lactase enzyme. Now coming to, it is very common in infants. There is another like sucrose, ग्लूकोज, सॉरी गलैक्टोज होना चाहिए था, आई एम सॉरी, ग्लूकोज एंड फ्रक्टोज. The enzyme is sucrase. Now deficiency of sucrase enzyme, it leads to disorder, that is sucrose intolerance, and it is very common in adults. When someone consume sugarcane juice in excessive amount, then it leads to this disorder, sucrose intolerance, and the symptoms are vomiting, diarrhea, abdominal pain, bloating, flatulence, which is due to production of the gases. Now what happens? This lactose and sucrose, it is gets fermented by intestinal bacteria, and it produces gases like carbon dioxide, methane, hydrogen, and that they cause bloating, flatulence, abdominal pain. Okay students, इन disorder को आपने ध्यान रखना है, lactose intolerance and sucrose intolerance. which is due to deficiency of lactase enzyme, and sucrose intolerance, it is due to deficiency of sucrase enzyme. It is common in infants, it is common in the adults. Okay. Now coming toward the absorption of the carbohydrate. Absorption. This glucose first of all glucose को देख लेते हैं. This glucose, it is the intestinal cell. This glucose and sodium, both, they are absorbed into intestinal cell. And glucose, it is absorbed through secondary active transport. Must remember, glucose, it is absorbed through secondary active transport, which is known as symport. Why symport? Because glucose, sodium, both, they move in same direction and they get transported into the intestinal cell. Glucose and sodium, and they are transported with the help of carrier protein. And the name of carrier protein is sodium dependent glucose transporter 1. Sodium dependent glucose transporter 1. In this way, glucose, it gets transported into the intestine. Okay students, now this glucose, it is transported into the blood for the circulation. Is the blood for the circulation by the glut, GLUT2. There are various types of the glucose transporter. 12 approximately, there are 12 types of glucose transporter, but first 5 transporter, they are very important. Here GLUT2, with the help of glucose transporter 2, this glucose, it gets transported into the blood. In this way, absorption of carbohydrate takes place. I am repeating again, glucose, it is absorbed through the secondary active transport, which is known as symport, and this process takes place with the help of sodium dependent glucose transporter 1. This is the carrier protein for the transport of glucose and sodium. They move along same direction. So such type of movement, it is called as symport. And glucose, it is absorbed into the blood with the help of this transporter protein GLUT2, which is present on the basolateral surface of intestine. Now coming toward the absorption of fructose. This fructose, it is absorbed through GLUT5 transporter protein. GLUT5 into the intestine. This is the fructose. Okay friends, ये absorption थी, absorption of carbohydrates. This glucose along with sodium, it is absorbed into the intestine with the help of carrier protein, sodium dependent glucose transporter 1, and this type of transport, it is called as secondary active transport. And glucose or sodium, they move in same direction, so that's why it is called as symport. And glucose, it is absorbed into the blood with the help of GLUT2, glucose transporter 2, and this glucose gets absorbed into the blood and for the circulation. And fructose, it is absorbed through GLUT5, this glucose transporter 5. Through this protein, fructose gets absorbed into the intestinal cells. So students, this was all about digestion and absorption of carbohydrates. There are mechanism of action of two enzymes, salivary amylase and pancreatic amylase enzyme. In pancreatic in the pancreas, through pancreatic amylase enzyme, there is complete digestion of the carbohydrate, and mouth there is a partially digestion of the carbohydrate, and the absorption takes place with the help of secondary active transport. Glucose or sodium move along the same direction, and glucose it is absorbed into blood with the help of glut 2 transporter protein, and fructose is absorbed through the glut 5 transporter protein, and this mechanism is called as facilitated diffusion. Here there is no need of sodium, but there is requirement of this carrier protein, so that's why it is called as facilitated diffusion. And there are two important disorders: lactose intolerance and sucrase intolerance, which is due to deficiency of lactase enzyme and sucrase enzyme. Okay students, keep watching and thank you.